Okay, guys, this conversation we're going to have tonight is pretty weighty. This is a big one for me, and I could not be more excited to talk about it for a few reasons. The first is that it's significant in my life because it addresses an element of my life which is really connected to fear. I've had this lingering fear in my life from a young age that one of two things is going to happen. One, that I'm going to screw it up, that I'm going to have a moral failure, that I'm going to mess it up, that the other shoe's going to drop at some point in my life and I'm going to screw it up. My other fear is that I'm going to get through life and look back at a life of mediocrity, where I'll just kind of resign into passivity with the one shot I have at life, and I'll look back and just feel mediocre, right? Those are my fears. I'm either going to get taken out and mess up, or I'm going to resign to mediocrity. I want to live a life of significance, and I have this fear following me that says you're going to screw it up, or you're not going to live a life of significance. I know I'm not the only one, because I've worked with enough of you guys, and this is something that follows us. And so on top of that, tonight's pretty special because this conversation really originated in my men's group as we spent hours and weeks and months processing a situation where one of my best friends had a moral failure. He got derailed. He had a sexual addiction. It ended up down the road into an affair, and it screwed up his marriage. It screwed up his relationships. It screwed up his job. And in the devastation of that, I'm sitting here going, okay, is one of my best friends, how in the world could this happen? Because this was one of my fears lived out in front of my eyes. And you better believe I'm not beyond that happening to me. So, okay, what is it? What is the underpinning that prevents this connected to this fear? Which is what we're here to talk about tonight, which is pretty exciting. And what is under those? What it distilled down into was something simple behind those. It's something simple but really difficult to achieve, and it's this. It's whether or not we have authentic relationships with other guys. I know that's a big, broad statement, but track with me and we're going to unpack this a little bit. The more we are connected as men, the more we're effective as men. If we increase our connectedness with other guys in authentic relationships, we're going to increase our effectiveness. And that's big, and do not lose me because there's a couple reasons why this is a core component in whether we're going to thrive or get taken out. Addressing those fears that I carry and always stay behind me a little bit. There's two primary ways why this is so important and why it's such a game changer to have authentic community with other guys, which is the fully known by a few piece. The first is that when I have authentic relationships with other guys and I feel connected, when I'm taking those 100 steps that lead me towards that moral failure, because it doesn't happen overnight, I'm walking towards that. If I've got guys in my life with consistency and authenticity, I've got guys to go, Robbie, where are you going? You know where that leads. Hold on, man. You know where you're walking towards. The guys can provide guardrails to limit the potential that I have that derailment. Right? On the flip side, it's not just accountability and guardrails. I've got guys, if I feel like I'm settling into complacency or mediocrity, I've got guys that love me, that know my hearts and my passions, and they go, whoa, Robbie, are you settling? Because we know your passion and your heart. Bro, lead in towards that and move towards your potential as a man. They push me towards my potential. So, connected, authentic relationships prevent the fears of getting derailed through guardrails, and they also push me towards my potential as a man. Guys, that is massive. So, we agree with this here, right? This all sounds fine. We're all going, okay, yeah, we agree with that. The problem is, most men in our society are following the wide road of doing life alone, right? And we look around, and it is so stinking common that guys are getting taken out or just leading mediocre lives. And none of us want that. We all want to live lives of significance, but the wide road is guys going down the road of isolation. So if there's a disconnect, we have to unpack this and figure out, okay, we can get it here, and this is a broad general concept, but what does it really look like in our lives, which is what we're going to get to do tonight. And if you guys have watched the first 3 videos, you know what we're talking about. But for everybody else, I'm going to spend a couple minutes catching us up. Because the first step in understanding where we are in regards to the spectrum of relationships and connectivity is understanding where we sit, because there's a spectrum. There are 4 seats where all of us sit in regards to the spectrum of how known we are, how connected we are. And it doesn't matter which seat we're in. There's guys in all 4 of these seats in the room, and I've sat in every one of these seats at some point in my life. But the important thing is knowing where we sit. Because if I know where I sit, then I can understand the reasons why I sit there, whether I like it, and where I can go, what the next step is. And then in a couple minutes, we're going to come and talk about the key towards moving the seats. So, to recap, we'll start over here. Y'all know what this seat is. A lot of you guys know. This is the alone seat, all right? About 40% of guys in our society sit in this seat. And this seat is a seat where guys just don't have anybody that they could trust with their last 10%. When asked the question, do you have somebody in your life that you would be able to trust with the worst of you, the last 10% stuff, and they would be able to receive you with grace and love? About 40% of guys in general in society can't name a name of a person. Guys are so lonely and isolated that this is way too common. This seat is way less for guys in this room because you guys are in community, which is amazing. An affirmation for you guys because you are here. And you're way above the curve of the norm because you're already in community. But there's a lot of guys that sit here, and some guys in this room, we just don't have anybody. That's the alone seat. The next seat is the evaluating seat. The evaluating seat is different than the alone seat because in the alone seat, you just don't have anybody that you'd be able to trust with your last 10%. In the evaluating seat, you have somebody you could trust, right? You have somebody that, yeah, if I would be able to share the worst of me, the last 10%, with that guy, and they would be able to receive me with love. We know we can name a name, but it's just not worth it. My buddy sat in this seat the majority of his life. He had guys he could trust. He chose not to. It's just not worth it in this seat. And there are tons of reasons why it's not worth sharing the worst of me. It's just uncomfortable even to think about, right, guys? Why would we? What's the pros? What's the cons? We'll unpack that a little bit. But the majority of guys probably in this room, the majority of us sit in this seat just because it's so easy to sit in this seat. It's like a lazy boy. This one gets comfortable. For guys that make it past the evaluating seat, there's the trusting seat. This is a big gap. So about 40% of guys sit in the alone, 40% in general in society sit in the evaluating seat, and only about 15% of guys sit in the trusting seat. Guys that sit in the trusting seat have made a decision. They've made a decision that it is worth trusting somebody with their last 10%, the worst of them. They've waited, and either they're too tired of being alone, or they hit rock bottom, or they just don't care, or they know, or they want to experience more connectivity with other guys and authenticity in relationships. So they've chosen to trust others with their last 10%. They've said it's worth it, which takes a lot of courage. And those guys make it to the trusting seat. The last seat, about 5% of guys in general sit in the known seat. The known seat is different than the trusting seat because you can choose that it's to trust someone with your last 10%. You can decide that it's probably worth being fully authentic with someone else. But in the known seat, you're living as a known man. You take that decision and you add intentionality to it. You add proximity, frequency, and intentionality to that relationship so you receive the benefits and the life and the freedom that come from being known. Guys, when you're in the trusting and known seat, it's amazing. You walk around with a freedom and a connectedness that's way different because in those seats, you have to keep people at a distance. And you receive love to that degree that you allow people to see the real you. In the trusting and known seat, you're able to receive love for you, all of you, not just the you that you're presenting to the other people, which makes these a rich, freeing, life-giving seat where we can sharpen each other, especially in known, where you grow from each other. This is where the iron sharpens iron starts to happen. because those two things happen. We prevent each other from following those steps that would lead to a moral failure, and we also push each other towards our potential as men in the context of connected relationships. That's how we become more effective as men. And that's our hope and that's our prayer, that we as men of our churches crowd out these seats, right? That we have the confidence and the trust to move into the trusting and known seat, and we grow through that. Can we imagine how many failures would be prevented if we trusted each other and knew each other? And how many marriages and relationships would be affected? Guys, these are the brotherhood. These are the relationships that are connected. This is the casket carrying type relationship. That's the fantasy football type relationship, right? We all have it, and it's okay, but there's a place, and it's limited in the outcomes. So, these 4 seats, they're here, and they present a spectrum that all of us sit in, and guys, there is no shame. We are all in a seat, and I've been in each of these seats. It's not a matter of where we're at as much as for the sake of feeling good or bad about it, because you guys are smart men and you've had different stories and you sit in the seat you sit in for a reason. But if we want to challenge and stretch each other as men to grow, the first step is to understand what seat we're in. Then we can say, okay, where do I want to go? And then how would I get there? Which is what we get to talk about tonight. So I'm going to let you guys talk as a group, as a table for about 15 minutes. And then I'm going to come up and talk about the key towards going where we want to go to the seat that we want to sit in. Does that sound good? Y'all enjoy. I'll be back up in about 15 minutes.